Gosh, I'm tired. Oh wait, there's a rule for that. Welcome to this episode of Conditions in D&D. Well, what is exhaustion really? Well, it's a condition that you can get. I'll go into the details of how you get it later, but what happens when you get it is a little complicated. You see, there is 6 levels of exhaustion, and more exhaustion makes your exhaustion worse, obviously. So at the first level of exhaustion, you have a disadvantage on all ability checks, similar to poisoned or whatnot. Not terrible in a combat situation, but disadvantage on stealth and perception and whatnot can be detrimental. When you reach the second level of exhaustion, your speed is halved, which means any travel time you take, movement in combat, etc., is obviously limited, but again, not terrible. 3. You have disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws. Now things are starting to get pretty cumulative at this point. So what do we have so far? Disadvantage attack rolls, saving throws, ability checks, speed is halved, and we're only halfway there, and it gets worse. When you reach the 4th level of exhaustion, your hit point maximum is halved. Hit point maximum! And this is on top of everything else. This is 4th level of exhaustion. Told you it gets worse. 5th level of exhaustion, your speed is reduced to 0. At this point, you're basically a D&D invalid. Your character is almost useless in battle and can't even move themselves. What's a funny prospect, however, is you could still wheel this exhausted character around in a wheelchair, which means that they could still fight and cast spells, which aren't too much detrimented by exhaustion, but they're still basically devoid of all functions as you'd consider in real life. Now, people say that in D&D, you can die by either taking massive damage or failing 3 saving throws. They're wrong, because there's a third way, ladies and gentlemen, from exhaustion. That's right, at 6th level of exhaustion, you die. No save. No nothing. You just flat out die. From lack of sleep. We know what exhaustion is now, but how do we get it? Well, there's 3 main ways to get exhaustion. Number 1, lack of sleep. If you don't sleep during a night, pull an all-nighter, that's 1 level of exhaustion. Now, this doesn't technically kick in until after your all-nighter, so you can still sleep during the day, the next day after you did that, and you'll be fine. But that is one way to get exhaustion. Second way is through some sort of ability, like the Berserker Barbarian's ability gains a level of exhaustion through that. Spell Sickening Radiance can hand out exhaustion. So that's the second one. It's very niche. Exhaustion is not something often used in mechanical spells and effects. And the third and final way to get exhaustion is through extreme temperatures or scenarios. Extreme cold or heat, sort of trekking through that for long periods of time could give you exhaustion and things like that. Now, the Dungeon Master's Guide and other things like that don't really expand much on how these extreme temperatures give exhaustion, but I'll go into that a little bit later. Okay, so that's how you get exhaustion. How do you get rid of it? There isn't a lot of options. 1, you sleep. When you finally get a chance to have a real good night's rest again, you remove 1 level of exhaustion. Pretty simple. After a few days of rest, you can fully recover. Second is through some sort of item or ability. This is actually pretty rare. There's only 2 occurrences of this. 1 is the Greater Restoration spell. This is a 5th level spell with a 100 GP material component. And it only removes 1 level exhaustion. 1 level. And the other way is through the Potion of Vitality, which removes all of his exhaustion, but is a very rare magic item, which is, 1 use and consumable. This goes to show at early levels, there really isn't much you can do to combat exhaustion besides sleep. And also goes to show you that when combating exhaustion, the more money you have, the better you're equipped to handle it, or just enjoy the game in general, which actually isn't that far from real life. So basically, otherwise, the only foolproof way you have to combat exhaustion is by sleep, which goes to show you the importance of sleep. If I want you to take anything away from this video, it's that sleep is good. Okay, so exhaustion can be scary, and there's not much you can do about it. But the good thing is, exhaustion isn't a common occurrence. It doesn't come up much, and in most normal games, it's probably not even going to be an issue. This is because even if you do get exhaustion, it's not going to kick in until, say you took an all-nighter. It's not going to kick in until the next day, and the first level of exhaustion isn't that detrimental, and you can just get, sleep, and it goes away. And additionally, there's not a lot of cases where that needs to be done. But DMs, there's stuff you can do to make exhaustion more of a threat. For example, put them in scenarios where sacrificing sleep might be advantageous. Say there's some sort of enemy force that's trying to get to the MacGuffin, and your players are trying to do there. Well, they can sacrifice sleep and get there earlier, but if combat arises, they're going to be a lot weaker and less equipped to handle it. So this adds dichotomy to it and adds exhaustion as an element, as a resource. You can also just add more ways to get exhaustion if you're a DM. Because exhaustion is a way to add a sort of realism to your campaign. But other ways is you can just, as a DM, add more ways to get exhaustion in the game. Exhaustion is interesting because it punishes a hard adventuring lifestyle. It adds grit to the campaign. If that setting fits, it's a great addition. Additionally, it can also incentivize players to get some rest, go to a nearby town, and which will of course allow you to throw more plot hooks at them. In a survival campaign, it's perfect, and there's a lot of outlets for it too. This is especially damning in a gritty, realistic campaign, where long rests are an entire week, so getting your exhaustion back is a lot harder. Additionally, harsh environments could be an outlet for this. Every day they spend in that harsh environment, they get a point of exhaustion until they rest in a place outside of that environment. Maybe if they're in a not very adequate shelter, like just using sleeping bags, after a few weeks, we get a point of exhaustion. And furthermore, in these sort of harsh settings, or just sort of possible ways to get exhaustion, you might want to have them make a con save, so it's not, immediately pressuring them. They have a chance to get out of it. Also, being in chase or underwater could also warrant exhaustion. Basically, I think chase rules are something like you have, you can dash number of times equal to your constitution modifier. Every dash after that costs level of exhaustion per con save or something like that, or it's something you can implement. Additionally, underwater is very similar. You can stay underwater a number of rounds equal to your con modifier after that base time of staying underwater, and after that, you can either just have it like you flow unconscious, you can't handle staying underwater that long, you have to come up, or maybe you gain a lot of exhaustion. There's lots of ways to implement it that are book-related or book-unrelated. Additionally, because exhaustion warrants this type of campaign, you could have it so that nightmares could be a possible outlet for exhaustion. Maybe there's a percent each night that each player gets a nightmare, and if they do, they don't sleep that night, and they get a point of exhaustion. This could be very interesting if you want to collaborate with a player who maybe has PTSD, and this could be a sort of interesting character flaw if it's that type of campaign. Having this sort of PTSD type flaw can be a sort of way for the character to finally conquer their inner demons and get rid of the nightmares once and for all. Additionally, there's a bunch of other ways to implement it, like carousing. The alcohol might be fake, but the consequences are real. Don't do alcohol or drugs, kids. There are a ton of other ways to implement it too. Failing a death save, con save against starvation, effects of poison and disease, etc. Also, one time in a campaign I was in, you could get these drugs that were cheap and, didn't had like sort of effects like the haste spell. And it's pretty powerful, but afterwards you gain 3 whole levels of exhaustion. So it's this sort of high risk, high reward situation. Also, through homebrew sort of additional rules, you can also do this. Like, I'm trying out something that I like to call the pushing yourself mechanic. Maybe you want to get in one more attack, you want to add some extra distance, you want to fight the pain and hold it back so you can stay upward and not drop to 0 hit points for that one last attack. Sort of ways to push your body beyond its limits, and sort of each time you make a con save, and basically each time this happens, the DC goes up, and every time you fail that con save, you gain a level of exhaustion. I think this is an interesting way to make the players feel, epic and cool, the fact that they can push themselves beyond normal limits, but also, again, high risk, high reward. It's ways to, again, it's up to them, so it's an interesting way to implement that. To make a long story short, Exhaustion is an underused campaign that, in the right setting, has a lot of potential. And DMs, it's definitely something to put on the players, especially because it's such a high danger if it's not taken into consideration. And players, now you know, don't get screwed by exhaustion, get your sleep, and don't do drugs. See you next time. This is Conditions and D&D.